Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm one of your hosts, Katie Halper.
And I'm the other host, Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Good Monday morning, Katie.
Good Monday morning to everybody and good Monday morning to Aaron. Welcome, everyone. And make sure you like this stream, because that's how you fight back the powers that be. And that's how you help us beat algorithmically people like Pod Save America. So we know the real pod that saves America, the real pod that saves the world, and it's not theirs, it's ours. It's Useful Idiots, and it's Monday morning. And you can join me after this at Callin.
We also save America by ruining our Sundays.
Yes.
To brighten up your Mondays, because we go over the Sunday morning news clips so that you don't have to, and that's what we'll be doing today. And as a reminder, you always can go to usefulidiots.substack.com to get bonus content,
or usefulidiots.locals.com. You got two choices.
That's
and
right.
Hello to everyone on YouTube, and hello to everyone on Rumble. And good morning from France. Wow, you see, that is how international our reach is. Yeah. And Quebec. Wow.
Okay, yeah. All the Francophone communities are tuning in today.
Yeah. Where's Senegal? We got Senegal in the house?
Yeah.
All right, we'll work on that for next week. Yeah.
All right. Well, someone who speaks the language of truth. The only language you need is the one and only Chuckster, who will be leaving us soon. But until he does, he's got some dose of reality. So let's hit it with the Chuckster.
Good Sunday morning. It has been a head-spinning 24 hours as Vladimir Putin has seen the most significant threat to his power since he took leadership nearly a quarter century ago. The mutiny by the head of the mercenary militia, the Wagner Group, comes at a pivotal moment in the war in Ukraine, and it raises questions about Putin's hold on power in Russia. Is he a lame duck? On Saturday, Yevgeny Prigozhin ordered his mercenaries to halt a march onto Moscow and retreat to field camps in Ukraine after claiming to seize several military facilities, including the Southern Military District headquarters in the southern city of Rostov-on-Don. It's the equivalent of a rogue army taking over CENTCOM in Tampa, a U.S. military operations center, and then marching onto the Pentagon. Now, Putin had promised to crush this armed mutiny, and he accused Prigozhin.
I mean, in that metaphor, that would be the equivalent of doing that and then turning around right away. And marching off of the Pentagon.
He left out that part after getting 200 kilometers away. That's the other part he left out.
Oh, right. He didn't even get there. Yeah, you're right. So that's the equivalent of getting to 250 kilometers away from the Pentagon. But besides that, Chuck, you're totally on point.
I don't think, by the way, Putin promised to crush anything. I think he called Prigozhin a traitor, basically.
Right.
But he didn't promise to crush the rebellion, because there was no rebellion to crush, because there wasn't a single shot fired. But anyway,
right.
Small details about the Chuck.
Small detail. And he also told the cops not to do anything. Like, he told people to stand down. I mean, what's interesting, and we'll see this again and again throughout these clips, is that they're so excited to turn anything Putin does into a sign of failure. Now, if Putin had responded more aggressively, they would have used that as an example of him being a brutal dictator who is fighting a civil war, which shows his weakness.
If you're Putin watching this at home, he's watching these shows, as I'm sure he does. That's, like, what else is he doing? He's got to be thinking, like,
Hi, Vlad.
I can't win. Like,
right.
If I stand down, then I'm weak. If I respond, then I'm brutal.
Right. Brutal and weak, because because I'm being forced to attack my own people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Putin can't win.
He can't win. Yeah. I'm sure there's a good rap song that you could cite about this, but we'll figure that out by the end of the show.
There was a great show in the 90s called Parker Lewis Can't Lose, and we could do a reboot. Vladimir Putin Can't Win.
Yeah. All right, we're doing it. We'll take meetings. We'll take business meetings with any company who's interested. So better act fast.
Of treason. Prigozhin accused Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu of starting the Ukraine war and then denying Wagner fighters ammunition. Prigozhin's forces drove to within 200 miles from Moscow, and then as quickly as this crisis erupted, it ended. And shockingly, it wasn't Putin, the strongman, who announced the deal, and the fact that it was a deal, but Belarus, Russia's ally, which offered Prigozhin amnesty in the country. We don't know if he's there yet. Notably, Putin blamed internal turmoil. He didn't do a rant against the West for this, for what he called a stab in the back, underscoring how weak he appeared. Prigozhin, also known as Putin's chef.
See, stab in the bag underscores how weak he appeared.
He's weak. He's weak.
He's so weak.
He's all powerful. He's all powerful. He has the power to, brainwash millions of Americans into voting for Trump, not for Hillary. So
Right.
he's he can fuel Black Lives Matter protests. He's responsible for systemic racism in the U.S. He's responsible for, COVID misinformation, as it's called. I mean, he's blamed for everything, but also he's weak. He's completely weak, and he has no power.
Right. And you'll see
win.
a couple of these talking points that you're going to see throughout these clips. One is that, he's not blaming the West, which shows something. I guess they're trying to say, which shows that he's acknowledging this is an actual Russian problem that he can't blame on the West.
Yes, which, unlike the West, which blames everything on Putin.
Right.
Right. From the 2016 election to anything else under the sun.
Right.
So Putin there is not doing the mirror image of what the West does on him constantly.
Right.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Restaurants that were a Putin hangout before he got to power, was responsible for sowing disinformation in the 2016 U.S. election as the founder of the Internet Research Agency. And then it was in 2014 that he...
I think that, again, is the claim that this internet troll farm that Prigozhin controls is spreading disinformation to sow discord, to, get Americans to fight each other and to elect Donald Trump. And again, as we've covered relentlessly, and shows like Chuck's will never acknowledge this disinformation because they're too weak. Yeah, the disinformation was dumb memes that nobody saw that weren't even about the election or barely about the election. That was the reality. But you can't say that on MSNBC. That's like a state secret, I guess, for them for another 50 years at least. Right,
or that a lot of the money that was spent on ads that happened after the election.
Yeah, after the election or during the primaries, and had nothing to do with the actual election. Right. It was a dumb troll farm that nobody paid attention to until they needed to blame Russia for Trump winning. That's when it became convenient.
Yeah.
Prigozhin founded the mercenary army known as the Wagner Group, which has been recruiting Russian convicts to fight in Ukraine to prop up a struggling Russian military. So this Russian mutiny has raised a number of questions about Russia's resolve to continue to fight a war in Ukraine that Putin was supposed to easily win on Saturday.
So this is another thing they keep saying. They're making it seem like Prigozhin was anti-war and upset about the war. He wanted more arms.
Yes.
He wanted to war. He wants to war harder.
He did. He led the fight to take Bakhmut from Ukraine, and he accused the Russian military of undermining him and not giving him enough weaponry. And recently he did criticize the Russian military leadership and said that they started the war on false grounds, but it was totally self-serving what he was saying, because he was a dogged supporter from the start of the invasion. He was like a hardcore supporter, and to the point where he went and led the fight, this really bloody fight to take Bakhmut. So this idea now that he's now anti-war or against the wars, it's very silly.
Yeah. Another interesting thing is that as much as they're calling Putin weak, an interesting point of comparison between Zelensky and Putin is that if you look at the Wagner group and you look at the Azov battalion is able to bully Zelensky around. And we know that because we've seen them threaten him, and he hasn't done anything to rein them in, even though they're neo-Nazis.
That is such a good point, and that would never, ever be made on shows like this, because you can't acknowledge the influence of Ukraine's far right and how they actually have undermined Zelensky. And we've talked about this, so much, that Zelensky was elected on this peace mandate to end the war in the Donbass between the Ukraine government and Russian-backed Ukrainians who wanted to, not have their rights trampled as as happened after the 2014 U.S.-backed coup. And when Zelensky went to the front lines and tried to tell Azov to stand down because he wanted to make peace, they told him to go away. And he had to like plead with them and say, I'm not a loser. And they basically laughed at him. And there are other people, for example, the founder of Right Sector, this guy Yarosh, he threatened to hang Zelensky from a tree if he made peace with the rebels in the East and ended the Ukraine war that began in 2014. So that's actually a real influence of a mercenary mutinous army, and they're still running the show basically. Right. And you would never hear that. That's a really, really great point.
Why, thank you.
Okay, more from the Chuckster.
Today, Ukraine's President Zelensky said that Russia's weakness is obvious.
The world saw that the bosses of Russia do not control anything. Nothing at all. Complete chaos.
Again, it's just so rich to hear this because he's the guy. And a lot of people, a lot of critics of Putin, when you talk about the Azov battalion, they'll say, well, what about the Wagner group, as if they're an equivalent. And they're not the equivalent for many reasons. But sure, let's for the sake of argument, say that they are their Azov. Well, again, Putin is the one in control of the Wagner group as opposed to Zelensky. And he's saying, there's chaos. It's like, well, it already has been resolved and nipped in the bud. And you couldn't do anything like that to Azov.
No, like Prigozhin's now in exile in Belarus.
Right.
And there's no way you can get the heads of Azov out. I mean, for example, one of the co-founders of Azov, who was like talked about how his mission is to like lead the world against the Semites and to like cleanse Ukraine of anyone who's not like purely Ukrainian, so like purely white Ukrainian. He was supposed to be like during like in the early stages of the Russian invasion, they're like, oh, he's not really there anymore, like he's out. Well, recently he was leading the fight of Azov in Bakhmut against Prigozhin's Wagner forces. So their influence is very, very strong still. And yeah, at least as of now, Prigozhin is now
as of now.
Prigozhin is now in Belarus, and it looks like Wagner is going to be disbanded or at least massively reconfigured. So, I mean, again, such a
who we should have on, by the way. I had him on the Katie Halper show, and this is why I'm now saying Azov instead of Azov, is Lev Galinkin, the Ukrainian journalist who has been begging the world basically to pay attention to the Azov battalion. And nobody is, despite the fact, like you just pointed out, Aaron, a lot of the Western media is pretending that they've rid themselves of their Nazi membership, because I guess they've handed out white fragility to the battalion, and they're no longer Nazis. But as he keeps pointing out, they're all still there. All these people are still there, and they still have like death to kikes in their Twitters, and white nationalist like music groups that they like. Yeah.
Well, who's also still there are all of these pundits who predicted that Russia was sliding into civil war and that there's going to be a huge bloodbath, and then not a single shot was fired. But yet all of them were still brought onto the Sunday news shows to weigh in and explain to us what was happening in Ukraine. So accordingly, we're not going to get a very accurate picture. But first, here is Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who spoke to the Chuckster.
Just see over the weekend. And the reason I ask that is because, look, this is a country that misinformation is a feature, not a bug.
Wait, let's start from the very beginning because I don't know. Hold on.
Just see over the weekend. And the reason I ask that is because, look, this is a country that misinformation is a feature, not a bug. Sometimes there's theater. What should we believe with what we just witnessed in the last 48 hours?
By the way, it's so funny. He says that misinformation is a feature, not a bug. And we've already pointed out a lot of featured misinformation from the Chuckster. And we'll continue to point out the misinformation from other pundits.
And then he asked his country's Secretary of State, what should we believe?
Right.
That's a question he's asking of a government official. Hey, hey, Mr. Government Guy, what should we believe? I'm a member of the Free Press. What should we believe? Tell us,
Right.
Anthony Blinken, what should we believe?
State media.
And government officials never spread misinformation, of course.
Right.
So whatever Anthony Blinken tells Chuck to believe is 100% true.
In Russia.
Well, Chuck, if you put this in perspective, what we've seen is extraordinary. Think about it this way. 16 months ago, Russian forces were on the doorstep of Kyiv in Ukraine, believing they would take the capital in a matter of days and erase the country from the map as an independent country. Now,
that's another thing that they were going to do. Erase Ukraine.
Except they went in to Ukraine with such a light force that everyone knows, including Blinken especially knows, there's no way Russia could take over Ukraine with the forces that they sent in. And their goal was not to erase Ukraine as a country. Their goal was to force Ukraine to accept a peace deal that Ukraine had refused to implement for the previous 8 years. The Minsk Accords, which was reached in 2015 to end the war in the Donbass, which began after the 2014 coup. And Russia's main demand was to get Ukraine to finally implement it and to accept it at the barrel of a gun after they refused to accept it in the many years of negotiations before, including right up to the invasion, when basically Zelensky refused to even speak to the leaders of the rebels in eastern Donbass in Ukraine. So that was Russia's goal. And to underscore that, just recently, Vladimir Putin produced a peace deal that he said was signed by Ukraine, and like he showed the document with the signature. And we've told the story many times where there was a peace deal reached in April 2022, so just a month into the war. And Boris Johnson flew over and told Zelensky not to implement it and said, if you do sign this, we're not going to have your back. So contrary to what Blinken's saying, Russia's goal was not to erase Ukraine. It was to get Ukraine to accept a peace deal, which the U.S. and its allies have constantly undermined. And that's why we're still into this war 16 months later.
Right. But again, you can just say that. And if we had a responsible media, Chuckster would be like, is that what do you mean to erase the country?
Yeah, no.
What's your evidence of that? But
nope.
Because misinformation is a feature and not a bug.
Now, what we've seen is Russia having to defend Moscow, its capital, against mercenaries of its own making. So in and of itself, that's extraordinary. And in so doing, we've also seen rise to the surface profound questions about the very premises for this Russian aggression against Ukraine that Prigozhin surfaced very publicly, as well as a direct challenge to Putin's authority. So I think we've seen more cracks emerge in the Russian facade. It is too soon to tell exactly where they go and when they get there. But certainly we have all sorts of new questions that Putin is going to have to address in the weeks and months ahead.
You know, the way Blinken sounds there, it's kind of like when you need to sound profound or as if you have something to say, what you say is, and I've used this trick before, basically just say, you know, and this raises new questions that will be answered in the period ahead, which is basically like just like an obvious thing. There's always new questions, and the questions will always be answered as time unfolds. That's the nature of time and just life in general. So Blinken is using that trick there, and you know, whatever. It's fair enough. But he's talking about new cracks in the facade and where they go when they get there. I mean, that means basically fingers crossed for regime change. That's really what the U.S. is hoping for above all is let's hope somehow this guy gets overthrown, because as Joe Biden said in the early weeks of the war, back when he was sabotaging a peace deal, he said, for God's sakes, Putin cannot remain in power. So that's still the hope. Yeah.
Also, I just want to put out there, because I see people in the comments, and in the world, people do this too. It's like, if you make the arguments that we're making, you're a Putinist. Now, I've been critical of Putin. I think that he's very anti-communist, which I don't like. He's pretty homophobic, which I don't like. That doesn't mean that he's wrong in this conflict. And that doesn't mean that if we are pointing this out, we're doing it because we love Putin. Just like if we pointed out that the U.S. was lying about WMDs, that doesn't make us Saddamists. Maybe that should go without say, but I thought I'd remind people of that. Yeah.
All right. So up next, okay, so Admiral James Stavridis is the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Another one of these people who constantly gets it wrong, so was constantly invited on to pontificate. Here he is speaking to the Chuckster.
We're seeing inside the Russian military leadership right now?
Continuing chaos, really of a piece, Chuck, with everything we've seen since the start of the war. You've seen terrible logistics, bad intelligence, bad leadership on the battlefield, casual use of cell phones. In fact, these events of the last couple of days will have unearthed a treasure trove of intelligence for the United States military. In terms of Prigozhin, I couldn't agree more with Ann. You know,
what's funny about him saying like how the U.S. is going to obtain so much more intelligence as a result of this? Right after this whole thing happened this weekend with this, failed mutiny, the Washington Post published a story saying like CIA learned of Prigozhin plot earlier than known. So the CIA was trying to say like, hey, by the way, everybody, we knew about this already because we're so good. Our intelligence is so good that we already knew about this. So yeah, like we're awesome. So that was like their response, to try to like take advantage and use the Washington Post, their reliable stenographers, to make themselves look good. And, that's basically the intelligence trove that resulted from this. We totally called this from the start.
Nailed it.
We knew about this. Yeah, we just couldn't tell you about it, but yeah, we knew that. Yeah.
The Game of Thrones philosophy applies here. If you go for the king, you better kill the king. Prigozhin didn't do that. He now is going to be isolated from the 35,000 fighters that have protected him. He's like a snake whose head has been cut off from its body. I don't think he'll last 60, 90 days, frankly, because Putin, at his dark heart, is a never forgive, never forget kind of person. He'll do everything he can to wreak vengeance on Prigozhin.
Do you expect this to have an impact on Russia's ability to wage war in Ukraine?
Oh, indeed. There's the moral function of this, the internal. Picture yourself as a Russian conscript watching all this unfold, and they are doing so on the internet. They have access. Number two, the material that has gone into the backing and forthing here is going to be denied. Number three, leadership changes potentially. As Mike McFaul said, watch what happens to Shoigu. Does he stay in power? Is he part of the deal? I don't know the answer. No one does. So bottom line here, been a very good turn of events for Kyiv. Still a tough fight ahead, but I think this is one that ups the game for the Ukrainians, Chuck.
So Prigozhin was asking for a change in the military leadership, and he's saying here that might still happen. But Putin said that there's no change in the military leadership as a part of his deal with Prigozhin. So we'll see. But the point is, and the reason why, the admiral's on TV, it's just to say that no matter what, Ukraine can still win. We have to pour more weapons in. We have to not negotiate with Russia, not support negotiations with Russia. That's always the point that the people come back to, no matter what.
And Prigozhin's desire to change that military leadership also undermines the claim that he's like anti-war.
Yeah, he wanted, in his opinion, a better leadership.
Right.
Yeah. To continue waging the war.
Yes.
Yeah. Which, by the way, and the reason why there was so much ecstasy from this crowd, from the neocon crowd, is because the counteroffensive that they widely hyped and promised was going to, lead to success, and Ukraine was going to retake territory, it's not going very well. CNN just acknowledged this, that the counteroffensive is falling well short of expectations, which is not surprising because Russia's also had the same amount of time to build up its forces. Russia always has had military advantage, so it's no surprise that the counteroffensive is not going as advertised. And accordingly, something like this pops up, this short-lived mutiny. And these people were ecstatic because they were hoping it could deliver the result that their counteroffensive never could, which is basically seriously weakening Russia and maybe even leading to regime change.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, neocons.
All right. Yeah, sorry, neocons. Okay, speaking of which, Jen Psaki is the former White House press secretary, now hosting a show naturally on MSNBC. And she has a take.
Just the last 48 hours, Yevgeny Prigozhin, a brutal shadow commander of Russian mercenary forces, staged a short-lived attempt to seize more power in Russia, briefly taking control over Rostov-on-Don, a key military logistics hub, on his way to march toward Moscow. But in the 11th hour, a shady and mysterious deal was struck by Lukashenko, a Putin ally and leader of Belarus, that left Putin.
Why is that a shady deal? What
because
makes
it didn't lead, because it didn't lead to the overthrow of Vladimir Putin, and it didn't hand Russia's nuclear weapon stockpile to a unhinged mercenary boss. So because it avoided all that, it's shady and it's mysterious. What we need is what we need is regime change in the world's other top nuclear power, and its nuclear stockpile falling to the hands of a shady mercenary boss. That's really what we needed here. It didn't happen. So
it's just it's so embarrassing because it's such a like amorphous casual word that she throws in without having to back it up at all. She just doesn't like it.
It's shady.
Shady. Shady. Good point from Covers Gaming. Psaki. It's a Psaki shady indictment. By the way, I'm sorry to do this, but as you know, we do ruin our Sundays to brighten your Mondays. So guys, where are we in likes, Wilson?
I'm seeing 608.
Oh, that would be half if we only had 1,200. What is it? Yeah,
well,
let's get it up to we got to get it up to 800. Guys, I don't know why I have to do this. I'd really rather not. This hurts me more than it hurts you. I'd really rather not have to do this. But we have to fight the fight.
If you like shady deals that avoid a nuclear holocaust, give it a like.
Give it a like.
Do it for shady deals.
And don't people see that Jen Psaki's on? Isn't that enough to like it? I got to spend all day yesterday with Jen Psaki.
With Jen.
I'm sorry.
Now everybody gets to this morning. I would like it.
Yeah.
We're at 7:30. Oh, where are we at?
768.
Okay, we only got a couple to go. 768, guys. We can do it. Half would be over 850, but I'm being very generous. I'm saying we only have to get
we did
800.
it. Thank you, everyone.
We got it? All right, phew. All right, let's keep going.
In power and Prigozhin packing his bags to move to Belarus. But we know from history that the story is unlikely to end there. Back in 1991, another Russian leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, also survived a coup, only to relinquish power 4 months later.
That's so stupid because for so many reasons, Gorbachev and Putin are so different. And so many of the variables there are different. But no one considers Gorbachev a Putin-esque figure. He was considered a pushover.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. But they're so excited. They're really hoping this is a Gorbachev moment.
Short-lived attempt to take over control of the Russian government exposes, at a minimum, some instability and weakness within the Kremlin. Where does this all lead?
Why within the Kremlin?
Well, because she's saying that because there was this brief mutiny where, where Putin's top allies turned on him. I mean, it was embarrassing for Putin. I mean,
of course it is. I guess I just would say it wasn't within the Kremlin. Maybe I'm quibbling a little bit, but I don't consider Prigozhin like within the Kremlin. But sure, it was it is embarrassing. It was a show of disorganization and
but certainly, I mean, Putin comes away from this, I think, having achieved. He gets rid of this kind of unhinged mercenary guy who was like causing a lot of instability and criticizing his top military leadership. Now he's in exile in Belarus. Not a single shot was fired, so nobody was killed. And he gets to, I think, take control over this mercenary army that obviously was going rogue. So I'm not sure that. I mean, certainly it was embarrassing for Putin, but I'm not sure in the long run if this will, actually hurt him, because with this guy, with Prigozhin out of the way and with Wagner, incorporated into the Russian military, that could actually make Putin stronger for him. Well, I mean, we'll see, but people obviously when the whole point of the proxy war is to weaken Russia and overthrow its government, that's the only lens they're going to see this through. So anything that can be spun just to show weakness and instability, that's what they're going to highlight.
Right. When we say no shots fired, there were shots fired, but not right. There was an aircraft shot down.
Was there?
American.
An American?
I believe. Let's see. What was it?
No. There couldn't have been an American aircraft shot down. There was Prigozhin accused Russia of bombing his own forces, and he claimed he showed footage of what was like a bombing scene, but it didn't actually. It looked fake to me.
Okay, and, I thought there was not American. I thought there was some aircraft shot down, but that was okay.
Yeah, Prigozhin accused the Russian military of attacking his Wagner forces, and that was supposedly one of the things that set him off. But at minimum, that was not confirmed, and it might have just been a fake on his part, for all we know.
Right.
But let's go back to Secretary Blinken, who's making the rounds. Here he is speaking to Face the Nation.
The U.S. prepared for the potential of the fall of the Putin government, and is their nuclear stockpile, the largest in the world, secure?
We always prepare.
Again, can we spin this into a regime change opportunity? That's the question on the minds of these cable news hosts. Is there a chance still for regime change? Is there still? Please tell us what to think, Secretary Blinken. That's basically what is going on there.
Prepare for every contingency. In terms of what happens in Russia, it's an internal matter for the Russians to figure out. Of course, when we're dealing with a major power, and especially a major power that has nuclear weapons, that's something that's of concern, something we're very focused on. We haven't seen any change in Russia's nuclear posture. There hasn't been any change in ours, but it's something we're going to watch very, very carefully.
Okay, well, no regime change for now, but we're
going to watch very carefully, which is another thing that's like we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
So
I just checked, Katie, and you were right. There was claims that Wagner shot down 7 Russian aircraft, but Ukraine said that. So the source for that is Ukraine, and I wouldn't take that at face value.
Well, I do see in Newsweek, Putin ally blasts Wagner after Russia's huge area losses during rebellion. But what we do know, and by the way, I said American aircraft. I obviously meant Russian. That was some kind of Freudian slip. But what we do know is that Putin didn't fire shots.
Yeah, no, and I don't. I mean, look, as far as I know, no one was killed. So for a civil war, this is pretty
light.
It's pretty light. But also, again, like the claims I'm seeing for shooting down Russian aircraft, that comes from the Ukrainian military. I would take that with a grain of salt because, it's in there just to make Russia look extremely weak, and it's in disarray. And so just keep that in mind. If people see reports of this, they should keep that in mind. That so far, unless I'm wrong, the source I'm seeing for this is Ukraine, which is not known as a reliable source of information about it. The opponent is trying. It's fighting, which is fair enough. I mean, it's a part of war to spread propaganda, but
all right. And we'll keep you updated on that. Yeah.
Yes, we're on it. All right. Another person who just got it totally wrong is Michael McFaul. He predicted this was a civil war. Lots of Russians were going to die. Anyway, here he is first speaking to Jen Psaki.
1 second, though. We got to read the super chat. Unfortunately, may distract NATO meeting and result in more money to war effort.
I think it's a safe bet.
Yeah.
I mean, they just found, like last week, they just found a bonus $6.2 billion to fund the proxy war in Ukraine.
Right.
Because the Pentagon said there was an accounting error. So I won't be surprised if they use this to find more money at the NATO summit.
I hate when that happens. Yeah.
All righty. So, okay, let's go to Michael McFaul.
covering, following Putin for many, many years. So the last 48 hours, I think, feel very strange, including that deal. Let me start with just what do you make of all of this?
Well, I have been following him for a long time. We first met Putin in 1991. That's how far back we go. But he's never experienced 48 hours like he just did. This is the biggest crisis of his time in power since he became president in 2000. And there are lots of weird things, like you just described, Jen, about the deal that caused this to go away, that everybody backed down. But let's make no mistake, starting at 30,000 feet, when you have one armed force threatening to go to war with another armed force, and they're both supposed to be loyal to you, that's bad for Vladimir Putin. And he emerges from this crisis much weaker than he was just 48 hours ago.
Okay, so Michael McFaul says that Putin's never had a 48 hours quite like this, and fair enough, it's true, he didn't. But you know who else has never had a 48 hours like this? Is Michael McFaul. Michael McFaul started off the whole rebellion thing, predicting a civil war. So let's look at some of his tweets, which he made so many appearances on cable news yesterday. No one asked him about his own predictions for the war. Right. So let's take a look at what Michael McFaul said. The fight is now on. This is now a civil war.
Yeah.
The first civil war I've ever heard of where no one died. I mean, it's pretty, it's quite the unique civil war. Okay, so that's Michael McFaul. Let's look at what else he said. Putin was clear in a speech just now. He has ordered his army and others to destroy Wagner and Prigozhin. Again, Putin actually didn't do that. So there's going to be a big fight. Russians will be killing Russians, probably in large numbers, unless Prigozhin surrenders. So he predicts there's going to be a big fight, and he's expressing. I think it's safe to say he's expressing some excitement at the possibility of Russians killing Russians in large numbers. Sorry, Michael McFaul, that it didn't work out.
Right, and because Prigozhin did surrender.
He did surrender. He did, and not only were there not a large numbers of Russians killed, there were no Russians killed. So. Right. Yeah. All right.
I think that there were. Okay, we're gonna get. We'll add this to the description, but I just want to say, I believe that even non-Ukrainians have said that some Russians were killed.
Okay. Well, that's news to me. Maybe I missed it, but I don't know where.
I put in in our private chat. See how honest we are. Most people would hide this moment of uncertainty.
Well, yeah.
But what we'll do is make sure to update the description.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't think anyone was killed, but anyway.
I think some pilots were. But we'll get back to you. Okay.
Okay. So I think we have one more for McFaul.
Oh yeah.
Here we go. Rats are jumping ship. So this is some longtime Putin ally leaving the country, apparently. So Michael McFaul says the rats are jumping ship. And as if everyone's abandoning Putin now that this threat to his power is advancing and there's going to be a big civil war. So anyway, that was Michael McFaul. And then he finally, and after, of course,
by the way, I like that he writes rats are jumping, not jumping ship, which makes it seem like they're just jumping. They're not even going anywhere. They're just jumping up in the air. Yeah.
So after Prigozhin stands down and there's no big civil war, Michael McFaul says, I was wrong about this, eager to learn why. There is so much to this story that we don't know yet. Well, one possible answer as to why is that McFaul is a Russophobe who's obsessed with Putin and obsessed with the possibility of overthrowing Putin, which has kind of been his job for many years now. McFaul's his life's goal, and that's why he got it so wrong, as he has many times before. So anyway, that's just a guess. But
in fact, we have a great appearance of him showing his insane Russophobia. Hold on 1 second. That's in there, right? I added that clip in.
Yeah, you did. So we can jump to clip. We can jump to clip 8, and then we'll go back to the This is so McFaul is such a Russophobe. So he's so excited at the prospect of Putin being overthrown that he even made a favorable comparison to Hitler, basically saying that Putin is worse than Hitler. This is his famous appearance. This is from many months ago.
And I wanted to say one other thing. I was just on Ukrainian television just 30 minutes ago. Brave journalists, just like our team covering the war there in Kiev. And one of the commentators said something interesting about how horrific this war is. And remember, these are people who suffered under fascism, that fought the Nazis. As the Nazis came and then the Red Army came back through. One of the Russian journalists said, there's one difference between Hitler when he was coming in and Putin. Hitler didn't kill ethnic Germans. He didn't kill German-speaking people.
Okay, pause. So what he's saying is, first of all, that's a little problematic to say about the Jews, who were the main target of the Holocaust. But he killed lots of German-speaking people, including Jews, because the Jews there spoke German, not Yiddish or Hebrew. I don't know what he's thinking. And a lot of communists, people with disabilities, gay people. I mean, does he not know his history at all? What does he think happened? That Hitler only killed people in Poland?
That's what happens with Russophobia. It's a hell of a drug. You say crazy things like that. And honestly, the only people who say stuff like that are Holocaust deniers.
Yeah.
Who, and Nazi supporters who try to make that claim about Hitler. He didn't kill Germans. I mean, that's literally like a Holocaust denier trope. And that's what he's repeating there. So that's who he is. And that's who he's brought on to provide expertise. And no matter how many times he says crazy stuff, it doesn't matter.
That would get a lot of people banned from television saying something like that.
Not Michael McFaul. No.
Yeah.
No. McFaul could not
McFailed his way. Someone just wrote McFaul McFailed his way to the top. Well,
yeah.
Good one. Where?
All right. Well, should we go back to McFaul, or we can go to some?
We can switch it up.
Okay, we can go to another pundit who also got it totally wrong. So first, let's look at this tweet. This is from the Atlantic magazine, where Ann Applebaum, who's like, supreme neocon pundit, huge cheerleader for the Iraq War, for the war in Libya, the dirty war in Syria, major apologist for the Ukraine proxy war. She constantly gets it wrong, but it does not impact her career. In fact, it helps her career. So this is her writing in the Atlantic magazine just shortly before this whole thing ended. In a slow, unfocused sort of way, Russia is sliding into what can only be described as a civil war. If you are surprised, maybe you shouldn't be. Well, if you're surprised that Ann Applebaum got this wrong, you definitely should not be, because that's her job. She always gets it wrong, as long as it serves neocon propaganda. Anyway, so that was her prediction and about a civil war. I think right as this article was published, the so-called civil war ended, but that didn't matter. And when she went on TV, she wasn't asked about it. She was just asked to provide her expertise. So let's go to Ann Applebaum.
Putin's been paranoid before. You've covered him, you've watched him, you've written about him so closely. What do you anticipate he's going to be like now?
Well, one of the interesting things about this moment was that he did not, at least so far, he did not blame the West. He didn't say, this is a Western plot. This is Hillary Clinton, which he has said in the past, or this is, somebody's organized this. I mean, he spoke immediately about internal divisions in Russia. And that can only mean that he's aware that these divisions are real and that it's going to be important to try and stop them. I would say he has two paths in front of him right now. Either a crackdown, and we'll see a much higher level of repression in Russia, even than we've seen up until now, maybe control of the internet, maybe locking more people up, or we'll see more chaos as more people look at what just happened and said, wait a second, if Prigozhin can drive tanks, into a 200-mile range of Moscow, then a lot of things are possible.
A completely useless answer. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. Right. And what is sure, though, is from what she's saying, is there's more chaos. We're going to see more and more chaos. But again, this is the same person who just predicted or just declared that Russia was sliding into a civil war. So I'm not sure we can take her predictions at face value.
And also, she's basically saying here that there are two possibilities. Putin like brutally cracks down internally, or other regime opponents will take their shot at Putin because they're sensing weakness, which is possible. But also, it's possible that the deal that Putin struck will hold.
Yeah.
And be enough to end the conflict. What's also interesting is that other regime opponents aren't as well armed, obviously, as Prigozhin. So they may think they don't have a chance. And one of Putin's like most capable opponents is Ramzan Kadyrov. And he rallied to Putin's defense.
Of course. Yeah, sure. I know. They're just desperate for any sign of weakness because they really want to overthrow him. And Applebaum recently wrote that basically it doesn't matter who replaces Putin if he's overthrown, because whoever it is, even if they're more ruthless, even if they're more like right wing, she said they'll be weaker. They'll be weaker than Putin is. So that's no matter what, it doesn't matter, because whoever replaces Putin will be weaker. And that's what the U.S. wants, is a weaker Russia that won't stand up to it. So that's all they can think about. They're afflicted with neocon syndrome. It's just that all they can think about is regime change and weakening Russia. And accordingly, any possible development will be spun in the service of that agenda. That's just how it works.
Yeah. He's a potential opponent, I should say. He's one of the few people with autonomy. And he's rallied to his defense. Yeah.
All right. So that's an Applebaum. We can go now to, you know what? We can switch it up from Ukraine, because another big thing happened recently, which is Secretary Blinken went to China to try to like mend ties after Balloon Gate, which we covered, Balloonary 6, as Kurt Metzger calls it, when a weather balloon flew over the U.S. and the U.S. shot it down, and Antony Blinken canceled his trip to China. So Blinken went back to try to repair ties, and things went okay. Like Blinken was kind of given the cold shoulder, but as soon as he came back, Joe Biden ruined everything. Where, speaking at a fundraiser in California, Biden declared that Xi Jinping is a dictator, and China said, like, basically, forget you guys. Like, you know, you're ridiculous. Like, we can't deal with it anymore. So this was embarrassing for Blinken, who went to China to try to, like, you know, patch things up. So he was asked about this by Face the Nation.
I want to ask you about Beijing. I was there with you earlier this week, and I listened to you pick every single one of your words very carefully. And then on our way home, President Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator with economic problems who didn't know what his own military was doing by flying the spy balloon over the United States. How much did that hurt the work you did?
Margaret, one of the things that I think you heard me say during the trip and after the trip is the main purpose was to bring some greater stability to the relationship. But one of the things that I said to Chinese counterparts during this trip was that we are going to continue to do things and say things that you don't like, just as you're no doubt going to continue to do and say things that we don't like. And if you look at what comes out of the
Are you saying
Chinese
that was a
Foreign Ministry on a daily
remark?
basis, you'll hear that. The president always speaks candidly, he speaks directly, he speaks clearly, and he speaks for all of us.
Okay, so that's Blinken's line. He didn't give a direct answer.
Right.
The president speaks candidly, he speaks clearly, he speaks for all of us. Poor Blinken had to go on CNN and repeat the exact same line because he can't give a direct answer to the question. So here he is speaking to CNN.
Believe that Xi Jinping is a dictator?
The president speaks clearly, he speaks candidly. I've worked for him for more than 20 years, and he speaks for all of us.
Okay.
That's a party line. He had his notes.
So basically, the dictator Biden told his functionary Blinken what to say, and Blinken repeated it dutifully. So I just love how he can't give a direct answer yet, and basically this is the line they gave him, and this is what he has to repeat. It's so funny.
Let's go to clip 13 next, since we're talking about China.
Okay. This is Congress member Mike Turner. He's a Republican, chair of the House Intelligence Committee. He's got concerns about China.
Let's hear what he has to say about how Russia Russia's going to affect the relationship between what just happened, how that's going to affect the relationship between Xi and Putin.
To talk a bit about China here as well, sir, but let me just button up. How would you define the relationship between China and Vladimir Putin right now?
Right. So President Xi's got to be very concerned right now because, as you know, he went to Moscow, stood next to Putin and said, we're together, he and Vladimir Putin are bringing about change that hasn't happened for 100 years. And of course, that is the march of authoritarianism against democracy that we won in World War II that they're now rising up against. But now he's.
Okay. So he's saying that these guys are marching autocracy, pushing back against democracy, the democracy that we won in World War II. Does he know what Russia was doing during World War II? They kind of helped defeat the Nazis.
Yeah, they only lost 20.
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, like all they lost was 27 million people to defeat the Nazis. That's that's all Russia did.
Right. Yeah. So he and Michael McFaul should take some World War II history classes together. They learn a lot.
They love that. I mean, these guys love World War II.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that they could, it'd be good for them, and they can maybe learn something.
He's standing next to a guy who can't even control his own military. Remember, Putin in his national address said that these individuals are going to have inevitable punishment, and then in the end, Prigozhin gets a vacation in Belarus, and his troops are now going to sign contracts. It sounds more like paperwork than a KGB agent doing inevitable punishment. Xi, in seeing that with Putin, has got to understand that Putin's stature in the world has diminished. That diminishes President Xi. And certainly as Putin looks weakened, certainly not being able to control his military and being a strong nuclear power, President Xi has to be worried about the stability of Russia itself.
I mean, I'm not sure I would describe being kicked out of Russia as a vacation in Belarus, although I'm sure Belarus is a beautiful country.
Yeah. I mean, Putin certainly was embarrassed. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, of course.
Really embarrassing. But does Mike Turner want him to kill a bunch of mercenary forces and have a major bloody battle? He avoided there was a clash avoided here, which is you'd think would be a good thing. You don't want to have that kind of instability inside a nuclear armed country. I mean, I don't know. That just seems logical to me, but it's basically because Putin didn't oversee a massacre of this mercenary army, he's weakened, he's permanently weakened, and that's it for him. And now Xi Jinping has to worry about supporting him.
Right. I mean, like you said, this is embarrassing. An attempted coup is never good. I don't even, but a very aborted coup.
Yeah, and it wasn't even a coup. It wasn't even a coup against Putin. I mean, Prigozhin.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It was a coup. Yes.
Yeah, Prigozhin said he always deferred. His intention was never to remove Putin. It was to remove Putin's military leaders.
Right.
And he was very clear about that. So yeah, but again,
but it's what better outcome could you have than the one he had?
I know, but they can't. They're not ready to acknowledge that yet. They say they're going to need probably 25 more years before they can acknowledge that.
Right.
This wasn't the civil war that they were clamoring for.
Right. They were hoping for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the clips actually we didn't show, but is someone who actually made the crazy point to Margaret Brennan that this was a good thing because Putin's much more stable than someone like Prigozhin would be.
Huh.
Which I kind of can't believe that they allowed it on TV.
Yeah. We are running low on time. So do we want to do the Cheney clip or should we skip that?
No, we can skip that, but we can. Let me just see if I can find the Face the Nation clip where he says that.
And for now, we're going to go also to another big story from this week, which was, normally would maybe be more news, but because of this whole thing in Russia, it got overshadowed, which is that Hunter Biden reached a plea deal with the federal government in his tax case, the investigation against him for tax fraud and also for illegal possession of a gun, because he obtained a gun while lying on a form about his own issues with addiction. And then he was facing an investigation in Delaware. Surprise, surprise, he reached a sweetheart plea deal that will see him serve no prison time. I'm sure there's nothing to do with him being the president. I'm sure there's nothing to do with the fact he's the president's son. Because Biden, of course, is very tough on drugs and crime.
Yeah.
He authored the crime bill.
On everyone but for his son.
Yeah. And so Hunter, after reaching this deal, he celebrates by attending the White House state dinner for Modi, the visiting Indian prime minister. And so Amy Klobuchar went on Meet the Press and was asked about this.
Before you go, I brought up the state dinner. Do you think it was appropriate for Hunter Biden to be at the same event as the Attorney General Merrick Garland was in the same week he accepted a plea deal?
You know, I think as the president explains, that's his son. That's a separate thing. And I would like to say about that decision was made by an independent prosecutor who is a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who had 10 years of experience, well-respected. Philadelphia Inquirer reported that he was a registered Republican. He looked at the facts and evidence and made that decision. And by the way, if that's what the Republicans want to run on in the coming election, good luck, because the president is going to be able to run on the strength of his work in bringing 13 million jobs back to America, in resurging manufacturing in our country, and in moving forward.
You understand the perception issue of something like that, though?
I do.
And do you wish that perception were different?
You always wish there were different perceptions, but that's not reality. Reality is whether or not someone is going to be able to get their insulin, and the president has made changes. Reality is whether someone has a job. Reality is when they can go visit their grandma again in an assisted living. Those are people's realities, not who is sitting where at a state dinner.
So good pivot, Amy. Good message discipline. Pivots right into trying to praise Biden's accomplishments.
If you can visit your grandma, then don't even think about Hunter Biden's sweetheart plea deal and how we have a two-tiered criminal justice system, and how Biden authored a crime bill and he bragged about imprisoning people with like just a small little rock of crack.
Yeah, and bragged that everything, including jaywalking, was illegal. Yeah.
Yes, and then saw his son completely avoid prison time. Don't even think about that. Don't even think about it. Yeah. And you know, her prediction that like her prediction that him running on the issues will win. I don't know. If you look at polls, it's not looking so great for Biden. So, but hey, that's their guy. All right.
But hey, why would any of these shows have on Marianne Williamson or RFK or Cornel West?
Certainly no. Definitely not. No. Yeah.
And so here is that we're going to leave you with an interesting moment of truth, and this is from former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, who's talking to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation.
I mean, it sounds strange sometimes, that phrase catastrophic success, when foreign policy analysts talk about it. But are we actually in a situation where Vladimir Putin is preferable to Yevgeny Prigozhin in terms of running the Russian state?
Well, he's certainly a known quantity. He's a hardened adversary of the United States, but the alternative could be worse. So I think the Biden administration is rightfully concerned, as David suggests, with chaos and uncertainty in Russia with their nuclear arsenal is very dangerous, not just for the United States, but for the world.
All right. So a little bit of truth there that, yeah, maybe having instability inside the world's other top nuclear power is not such a good thing.
Right.
It's good they allowed that on for 10 seconds on the cable news shows. Just a little bit of truth, a little taste of truth.
Right. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of impressive, this has been another impressive episode of Monday Morning.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. And we're gonna you can join me on Callin right now. And don't forget, of course, to like this, to subscribe, hit subscribe and then press the bell. And of course, subscribe to us at Substack and Locals. And that is usefulidiots.substack.com and usefulidiots.locals.com. All righty.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning
everyone.
in. See you next time.